Okay, that's me. Hello, everybody. Hello, good afternoon. CLEA, good afternoon, world. We are meeting again for the CLEA seminar, and this time we'll be listening to Luca Fabbris from the University of Turin, who is a visiting scholar at CLEA in this season. And he will be speaking about observing objects and second-order cybernetics. And I wonder if us listening to you, Luca, how it will qualify. If we just stare at you, it will be the first order observation, and if we listen to you, it will be probably the second order. Okay, but maybe not. Like, so in whatever order we are observing you now, okay? And all spotlights on you. Just a moment now. Oh my gosh. Okay, that is a surprising view from the camera. Oh, the camera. This is a surprise. We should have used it in the games last week. Yeah? Yes. Okay, we are playing with the camera. Just a moment. Just a moment. Now, yeah.
Okay. So. Start. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Marta, for introducing me, and thanks everyone for coming. Also, many thanks to CLEA for having me. It is an absolute pleasure and a privilege to present here my most recent work. It is a work in progress, and it is very theoretical and somehow abstract, but I am a theoretical philosopher. So if you prefer, a concept designer. And so my work consists precisely in constructing abstract objects. Okay, I would like to start from the subtitle of my presentation, revisiting second-order cybernetics. In my talk, I'll try to visit again some second-order cybernetics region. I will try to re-explore these areas in order to map them out anew. And I'll sketch out two second-order cybernetics lines. We could call them the first one the observing systems line, and the second one the observing object lines. These are not two completely opposite lines of thought. They sometimes overlap, but it is important to acknowledge that there are very significant differences between them. And basically, I try to assess what role is played by different elements in these two lines of thought. So I will consider, for instance, observers, objects, systems, actions, processes, operations, and so on. And finally, I'll try to connect this discourse to the contemporary philosophical movement called object-oriented ontology. Okay. Yes, the aim of revisiting the landscapes of second-order cybernetics is threefold. First, to question the observation-operation distinction, which is the keystone of observing system approach. Second, to propose a theoretical framework that overcomes both reductionism and holism. The overcoming of this dichotomy passes through the questioning of the mereological opposition whole part. And third, to outline a theory capable of overcoming the opposition between object structural substances and actions, operation, processes. This is the structure of my talk. It is articulated in 6 parts with an eco-political footnote. I will deliberately avoid giving you ready-made definition of second-order cybernetics, such as Heinz von Foster's one. First-order cybernetics is the science of observed system. Second-order cybernetics is the science of observing system. Instead, I want to offer you a speculative trip in which second-order cybernetics, object-oriented ontology, and so on are treated as islands or archipelagos of conceptual problems and tools. So I will proceed from problem to problem, avoiding convenient definitions, and definitions will emerge spontaneously. Okay. This quotation from an introduction to cybernetics by Rose Ashby could be a good starting point for my trip. As Ashby says, and I quote, "Every material object contains no less than an infinity of variables and therefore of possible systems. The real pendulum, for instance, has not only length and position, it has also mass, temperature, electric conductivity, crystalline structure, chemical impurities, some radioactivity, velocity, reflecting powers, tensile strength, a surface film of moisture, bacterial contamination, an optical absorption, elasticity, shape, specific gravity, and so on and on. Any suggestion that we should study all the facts is unrealistic, and actually the attempt is never made. What is necessary is that we should pick out and study the facts that are relevant to some main interest that is already given." End of quote. The main interest in question is the issue of an embodied, situated observer. According to Ashby, the observer selects a number of finite variables from a material object, which in turn features an infinity of variables. And the variables selected by the observer will constitute the system chosen for consideration. Clearly, the main goal of this vivid example proposed by Ashby is to distinguish between a material object on the one hand and a system on the other. A system is not a material object. The relation between system and material object is the same kind of relation that exists between the map and the territory. The map is always the outcome of a construction operated by a certain observer, so that the map cannot exhaust the territory. In this sense, the system is always an artifact. We cannot encounter systems in nature. We construct them. This is why, for Ashby, it doesn't make sense to talk about system as independent from a given observer. Okay, I start by calling into question this triangulation, observer, system, object. In an introduction to cybernetics, Ashby is quite clear about the nature of the system. A system is a model of a material object, and it is by means of such model that an observer can try to control the object in question, to predict its behavior, and so on. However, Ashby is not so clear about the nature of the observer and about the nature of the material object. Therefore, we can only try to infer their features and functions. In an introduction to cybernetics, the observer very often seems to be the scientist who sets up an experiment and isolates the system from an environment. However, it is possible to regard Ashby's observer in terms of a more general agent, so that we can argue for the observer to be an agent performing an operation of selection or distinction, as we have seen in the pendulum example. The material object can be considered as a space of possibility, a set that potentially includes an infinity of variables available for selection, a set that cannot be exhausted in any selection made by an observer. An object is always observed from a specific point of view. Even the sum of the points of view would not give us access to the infinity of the object, so to speak, which can never be grasped. By considering the whole of points of view on the object, one does not grasp the object itself. Rather, in so doing, one builds a system, a complicated and intertwined map. So by resorting to an expression largely employed by object-oriented ontologists, we might say that the HB's material object withdraws into its deepness. It eludes any possible grasp by an observer. The material object is a black box whose interiority is unscrutable and inaccessible. And this means that what the observer can know is limited to what they have built, to what they can determine by operating a distinction. Observers can never access the material object itself. And it is at this point that we encounter a first problem. In the framework of HB's theory, a material objects, such as the real pendulum, exist. And it is exactly what it is that pendulum and nothing else. So we can wonder what the genesis of the material object, what the genesis of the material object is. Does the observer play a role in such genesis? What is the process that sets the boundary of the real object? It is an observer-dependent process or an observer-independent one. In the case of a pendulum, the point seems quite trivial. The pendulum is an artifact, which means that an observer had to make it. More complex is the case of a so-called natural object, a crystal, for example, a cloud, a sea, a mountain, a river, a virus. If we claim that the object's boundaries are established by the observer, then we lose the distinction between system and material object. By accepting this conclusion, we will be forced to admit that everything should be considered a system. Here, a second problem emerges, this time concerning the observer's ontological status. If everything is a system, then the observer must be a system too. So if we stick to HB definition of system, then considering the observer as a system entails the impossibility for an observer independent to exist. It is clearly a paradox because it ends up in infinite regress. Observer 1 is constructed by observer 2, who is constructed by observer 3, and so on. Or in a weird encapsulation of observer, as depicted by Heinz von Foster in Self-Organizing System and Their Environment. Von Foster presents an argument against the solipsistic thesis, according to which the external world exists exclusively in the observer's mind. This is a representation of the paradox drawn by Gordon Busk. There is a man with a hat. He is a solipsist. Inside his mind, there are other observers engaging with him and so on. As observers, the external world exists only in their minds. And in the world, in their minds, there is also the man with that. This is clearly a paradox. In order to avoid it, we must conclude with Heinz von Foster that an external real world must exist, and that such world is independent from the observer's mind. It might seem ironic that this argument was outlined by one of the most prominent exponents of radical constructivism. The same author who wrote a paper titled On the Construction of a Reality. But as I will try to show later, this ironic effect is due to the commonsensical assimilation of constructivism with solipsism, which is, in my opinion, is clearly a mistake. Okay, for the moment, suffice to say that if we consider the observer as a system in HB's sense, then we are pushed back into infinite regress or into the paradox of the man with the hat. In order to avoid this paradox, we must assume the real existence of the observer. namely then an observer is an observer-independent entity. So when in second-order cybernetics context we find the expression observing system, the meaning of system is not HBs. The genesis of the observer cannot depend on a further observer. To account for the ontological status of the observer, one needs to resort to a theory, to the theory of autopoiesis. As we all know, autopoiesis refers to a network of productive operations which produce the very operations belonging to the network itself. And operating in such a recursive way, an autopoietic network creates boundaries, distinguish itself from the surrounding environment. This distinction does not depend on the observer's operations, but on blind operations, so to speak. In this sense, the operation of observation does not occur on the same level of the autopoietic operation. This distinction between operation and observation is a crucial aspect of Luhmann's work and of the work of one of his disciples, Helen Esposito, but the same distinction is to be found in Maturana's thought, according to which it is necessary to maintain a distinction between the domain of operation and that of observation. Varela too argues for a similar distinction. On the one hand, there are symbolic explanations which are traced back to the observer's perspective. On the other hand, there are operational explanations which are independent from the perspective of the observer. But here, however, I would like to focus on Helen Esposito's doctoral thesis, supervised by Luhmann himself. Her dissertation represents an emblematic work on this topic, as it is clear from the very title, that reads in Italian L'operazione di osservazione, operation of observation. And the starting point of Esposito's work is the idea that despite the fact that observation must be considered an operation, its way of operating differs from that of autopoietic operations. Autopoietic operations are blind, as I said, which means that they are not goal-oriented, they are not teleological, they are not meaning-oriented, and so on. These blind operations produce and maintain the system's boundaries, marking a distinction between the system and its environment. But blind operations cannot make use of the distinction they produce, nor can they observe it. They are not self-reflexive. In other words, autopoietic operations are univocal. Their logic is monovalent. It is quite the contrary for the operating that the observation is. We consider, if we consider observation, we notice that not only does it make a distinction, but it also uses such a distinction in order to refer to one of the two sides. An observing system can observe its own difference and therefore and refer to itself, self-reference, or its environment, heteroreference. In other words, an observing system not only produces the distinction between inside and outside, but can use this distinction, namely can refer to one of the two sides. So the logic of observation is bivalent or biunivocal. An observer can both indicate and negate something. Negation is an operation of observation. Negation cannot occur at the autopoietic level. It follows that the distinction between observation and operation can be established only by an observer who can use negation to operate. So observation is not a blind operation. And of course, this account falls into a circular loop. Blind operation, autopoiesis are required in order to explain the genesis of observation, because an observer, as we have seen, must be an autopoietic system. At the same time, Observation is required to distinguish between operation and observation. So we bump into the following problem. How can we explain the genesis of observation by means of operations? To put it differently, how can a biunivocal operation emerge from univocal operation? By simply adding up univocal operation, we do not obtain a biunivocal operation. We just end up with a collection of univocal operations. So we cannot explain the genesis of observation. We can only presuppose observation. This problem remains open in Helen Esposito's work, but also in Luhmann's work. In Esposito and Luhmann's account, there is no way out from this loop. But in any case, what is interesting for me, for my discourse today, is the question about the ontological status of objects in the observing system framework. To gain a better understanding of such ontological status, we must consider the relationship between an autopoietic system and its environment. An autopoietic system does not receive information from the environment. If it could import information from the outside, if it could use operation belonging to its environment, then its operative closure would fail. Between an autopoietic system and its environment, there is a structural coupling. The system is sensitive only to a restricted set of perturbations coming from the environment. To maintain its operative closure, the autopoietic system compensates said perturbations by means of structural change. As this process leads the autopoietic system to select those structural coupling that are less subjected to environmental perturbations. These structural coupling are order partitions, stable patterns, or as we generally call them, objects. In this sense, an object is actually produced at the autopoietic level. It is the result of an autopoietic activity of the blind operations that maintain the operative closure of the system. Of course, autopoietic systems cannot observe the object they produce. Only observing system can observe these stable patterns and use them. So the construction of an object takes place at the autopoietic level. Nevertheless, it is only at the observation level that an object, a stable pattern, can be pinpointed, used, distinguished from other patterns, and selected or negated. To summarize, an object is the correlated product of an autopoietic activity, but it can be used, detected, and become object of reflection only for an observing system. So an object whose boundaries has not been generated by an autopoietic system cannot exist. So while in Ashby's account we found observer capable of selecting systems from material object, in second order cybernetics we find systems capable of observing objects which are stable patterns generated by recursive operations of an autopoietic systems. Now, the distinction between operation and observations gives us a clear criterion to distinguish between systems that are able to refer to themselves and systems that are unable to refer to themselves. Only an observing system can be self-referential. It can be referred to certain operations that happen inside its operative boundaries. This is the case because only observing systems can make use of the distinction inside-outside, indicated either one side or the other. Without the operation-observation distinction, the criterion to distinguish between self-reflexive and non-self-reflexive system would disappear. So that either only self-reflexive system or only non-self-reflexive system would exist. And since in our experience as a human observers, we are indeed able to refer to ourselves, we must conclude that only self-reflexive systems exist. In other words, any existing thing can observe itself. At first glance, this idea might seem rather weird. However, it has been developed in a coherent way by Glanville in his doctoral thesis titled A Cybernetics Development of Epistemology and Observation Applied to Objects in Space and Time, in which he outlined an original thesis, an original theory of objects. In his dissertation, Glanville described a universe in which only objects exist. The objects in question are not material objects, passive and inanimate entity, but autopoietic units. But in contrast to the framework outlined by Luhmann and Esposito, in Glanville's account, autopoiesis is equivalent to self-observation. Any operation is an observation, and any observation is an operation. In other words, in order to exist in Glanville's universe, an object must be capable of observing itself. Since an object can observe itself, it can also observe other objects. As an observer, it can either self-refer or hetero-refer its observations. In short, in Glanville's universe, only observations exist. And there are two possible modes of existence. As an observed observation, what we usually call an object, the object of an observation. As an observing observation, what we usually call an observer, the agent of an observation. Object and observer are nothing more than two different roles that an observation can take up. Therefore, Glanville's universe is radically perspectivist. What exists are points of view, and such points of view can, each time, either observe or be observed. Okay. We have said that an object as an autopoietic unit exists only provided that it can observe itself. Since it is able to observe itself, it can also observe other objects in the universe. But what it can observe in self-observation is not the same it can observe in hetero-observation. In the self-observing process, an object can catch what Glanville calls the essence, its private side, which an external observer cannot observe. In the hetero-observing process, in turn, an object can observe only the behavior of another object, its public side, and not its essence, its private side. So any object has both a private and a public side. The object is both sides, the private and the public one. In other words, an object cannot be reduced to its essence nor to its behavior. The object's behavior depends on the relation it maintains with another object, whereas the essence of an object is the result of a self-production. Its behavior is the result of a co-production that involves both the observed object and the observing object. The object is, at the same time, the result of a self-production and of a co-production. Okay. Glanville's ontology entails some intriguing consequences. One of them is connected to the role of models and to the process of modelization. According to Glanville, an observing object can observe more than 2 objects at once, and it can employ one object as a model for another one. The description of an object is the production of a model. That is to say, the behavior of an object is used to represent a certain behavior of another object on the basis of an equivalence of isomorphism that has been observed between the behaviors of the 2 objects at stake. But this identity does not exist in itself, since an object as an autopoietic of self-observing unit is unique. It cannot be reduced to anything else. The identity detected between different objects is not in the objects themselves, rather it is computed in the general sense of computare, put together by the observing object. So, to wrap it up, Glanville's universe consists of differences of unique objects which, in their singularity, cannot be described nor represented. Description is the use of a given object to represent another one, but no object can be reduced to the description produced by an observing object. So in Glanville's universe, we can find the same principle of irreducibility that will be further developed by Latour some decades later. As we will see, this principle will also play a pivotal role for object-oriented ontologies. So in observing objects framework, the universe consists of units that are irreducible to one another. They share a public side, which means that they can meet, observe each other, they can transform and operate on another, and so on. But they can do so without losing their mutual differences. The difference that sets apart one unit from the other gets lost only if the private side of said unit falls apart. It is only when the circle of self-observation breaks that the object disappears. In Glanville's universe, observers, systems, and objects, to get back to the Ashby's tripartition, are modes of existence of the same unit, roles assumed by an autopoietic unit. Okay, let's focus now on the concept of unit, which, according to Glanville, identify an object. These concepts allow us to single out the similarity between Glanville's theory of object and object-oriented ontology. Thanks to object-oriented ontology, I think that it is possible to clarify some aspects and enucleate some theoretical implication in Glanville's theory. Okay, Jan Bogost employs the concept of unit in his book Operative Units. A unit is at the same time an autonomous entity, a system. A unit is always composed of other units and a part of another system. Namely, it can enter in composition with other units. As an autonomous unit, it can be considered a mere, it cannot be considered a mere function of the whole of which it is part, just as much as it cannot be reduced to the units composing it. Every unit operates on and is operated by other units. So a unit is simultaneously what it does, its behavior, what effect is the behavior of different units to which it is subjected, and that in which it consists, operative closure, self-observation. We can find a similar scission of the object in Graham Harman, the father of object-oriented ontology, for whom an object is split into a real and a sensual object. The latter is the public side of the object, which can be experienced by other objects, each time for a particular point of view. But the object is not only this aesthetic relation, it is not only the thing we can experience, the real object withdraws from the sensual grasp of other objects, and it falls into the abyss of its private side. This means that an object, when observed by another object, is always a black box, and as a black box, it is a non-trivial object. We cannot grasp it in its reality. It can always turn out to be something different from what we thought it was. Okay, a unit is always a difference. Not only because it is different from other units, but also because an internal difference crosses it. It is inhabited by a difference. For Glanville, an object is the difference between public and private sides. For Harman, an object is the difference between the sensual object and the real object. The object per se cannot be reduced to one side, not to the other. On the contrary, it is the very difference between these two sides. So how can we understand this identity of differences? This co-presence of an inside and an outside within the object. This is a classic issue in second-order cybernetics, and we can trace it back to Spencer Brown's laws of form. The production of a form consists in considering a space and marking a distinction within it, inside, outside. The form is this very distinction, so that it cannot be reduced to either of the two sides. If we consider the inside as a form, within the inside there will be the outside, because the form is the distinction of outside inside. With a paradoxical movement, the form re-entering into itself externalizes itself. By reproducing itself, the form produces what is other from the self. And we find the same distinction in Luhmann's definition of system. The system is the difference between system and environment. So we find inside the system, the outside, the environment. So a Spencer Brown's form, a Luhmann system, a Glanville's object, a bogus unit are all differences, are strange topological objects, a sort of Mobius strips. To use an expression that Glanville takes from a Beatles song, your inside is out and your outside is in. This means that no unit belongs to another unit, but at the same time, no unit belongs to itself. In this sense, a unit is a difference. So the distinction between parts and whole no longer makes sense. Nothing is part of something, but every unit presents, yes, part of something else, but every unit presents an inside that is outside and an outside that is inside. Now, Levi Bryant, one of the most prominent exponents of the object-oriented ontology, uses the expression weird mereology to indicate that an object is composed of other objects, which are at the same time parts of it, as well as autonomous units. Mereology is the study of part-whole relationship. The weirdness of this mereology lies in the idea that no objects can be considered a mere function of another object. Historically, anti-reductionism positions have often argued for the whole to be the more than the sum of its parts, so that we cannot reduce the whole to the behavior of any part taken in isolation. But anti-reductionist positions do not consider parts at the same level of the wholes. they tend to downgrade parts, considering them mere function of a whole. In this way, wholes result irreducible to their parts, but parts end up being reducible to function of the whole. This ontology presents a hierarchy of integrated levels in which the integrating level is more than the sum of the parts integrated. In this ontology, individuals are not autonomous units. They rather owe their ontological status to the fact that they belong to a specific totality, which confers them meaning and function. Jan Bogost has defined this ontology system operations, in contrast with his own account that he calls unit operations. I quote, "System operations are totalizing structures that seek to explicate a phenomenon, behavior, or state in its entirety. Unlike complex networks which thrive between order and chaos, systems seek to explain all things via an unalienable order." End of quote. In the system operations framework, a structural order is imposed as a regulatory principle to behavior of the singular units. Singular units either behave in accordance with this order or they are considered deviant. It is crucial to notice that the system operation theory refers to a rather classical concept of system, which has been methodically deconstructed by Luhmann. As Baker suggests, and I quote, "Systems theory, in line with Luhmann's intellectual spirit, may well be read as an attempt to do away with any usual notion of system. The theory in a way being the deconstruction of its central term." End of quote. So, in the unit operation frameworks, every single unit is external to the others. Even the unit operating inside the topological boundaries of another unit must be considered external. This is more of a post-mereology than a with mereology, since the distinction parts whole is theoretically rejected. Every unit can observe the other ones, which means that it can select some behaviors of other units. This selection establishes a structural coupling. So two units that are structural coupled can depend on each other while remaining autonomous. Oftentimes, it is dependence what ensures autonomy. This may look like a paradox, but it is not. An example can help us on this point. Let's think of a pacemaker. A pacemaker is a unit operating on another unit. A heart, unable to maintain its autonomy, whose behavior, an irregular heartbeat, jeopardizes its operative closure. The dependence on the pacemaker allows the heart to maintain its operative autonomy and continue to exist as a unit. In other words, autonomy is not synonymous with independence. It may be a codependence between two or more autonomous units. And this dependence can increase the variety of behaviors that the two units can perform. The phenomenon of addiction, for example, one of the plagues of our age, might be understood in the light of this distinction. Any structural coupling generates a relation of dependence. But there are dependencies capable of maintaining or increasing the operative autonomy and the behavior variety of a unit, a variety a unit can have, while other dependencies drastically reduce this variety. A unit is absorbed in a black hole, totally captured and eventually annihilated. In short, nothing is independent, but everything is autonomous. the unit ceases to exist when a transformation goes as far as to break its self-observing circle. Moreover, the interaction between units can produce bizarre configurations, strange loops, and hierarchies. Units do not respect the hierarchy, since hierarchy exists only from the observer point of view. In this sense, not only can a molecule become a social actor, see COVID-19, but also the biosphere. Gaia can do so. No? The case of Gaia is fascinating. Let's consider Isabel Stenger's expression, the intrusion of Gaia. Where does Gaia intrude? In our social life, naturally, perturbing and messing it up. But this expression makes sense only if we conceive Gaia as an autonomous unit, not as an incubator of which we are parts. There isn't a relation or whole part between Gaia and me, because as a unit, I belong to nothing. Between Gaia and me, between Gaia and all of us, there is a structural coupling implying a mutual dependence. Gaia is an autonomous unit depending on the activity of the units that populate the planet. The units populating the planet depend in turn on the fact that Gaia can maintain its autopoiesis, but my autopoiesis cannot be confused with Gaia's. We have two external objects. No? As a physics unit, as a psychic unit, sorry, as a self-consciousness, I'm not composed of something. I am an individual, an inseparable unit. I have no parts, but I am structurally coupled with a myriad of other units, cells, organs, technical devices, persons, institutions, molecules, Gaia. Okay. So Glanville's theory of objects, on the one hand, extend the concept of autopoiesis beyond biology, turning it into an elementary and transversal phenomenon. On the other hand, on the other, reject the distinction between operation and observation, or that is the same, the distinction between self-reflexive and non-self-reflexive system. Every object is a reflexive system. Its condition of existence is self-reflexivity. In this sense, operative closure and observation become synonymous. Every object is therefore a sort of self-description, self-computation. This is a non-commonsensical point of view, given that in our experience, the distinction between self-reflexive and non-self-reflexive system appears rather natural. Another human is no doubt a self-reflexive system, while a rock is not. But this distinction, this natural posture, is rooted in the fact that we can produce self-description. This is my personality. I made in this way. And we can know only the self-descriptions that another system is capable of communicating to us. On the contrary, I am this other way. And obviously, not all units can communicate their self-descriptions. And this is why we tend to consider them non-self-reflexive. This does not entail, however, that they actually are non-self-reflexive. The use or not to use or not to use the distinction operation observation is an observer choice. There is no object criterion to identify the right choice. But at this point, an urgent question emerges. What is the exact ontological status of operations, processes, and actions in the observing objects frame? If everything in the universe is a Glanville subject, then processes, action, and operation must be considered objects too. Otherwise, they would not exist. For an object, process, action, operation are modes of both itself and ether observation. In other terms, there is not a level of operations, processes, action beyond the autopoiesis of a unit. Every operation, action, or processes is always ascribable to an autonomous unit. In this sense, Glanville's second order cybernetics is incompatible with any philosophy of the pre-individual. This is the case because in this theoretical framework, Glanville's theoretical framework, there is not such thing as a level of pure operations, actions, processes that would precede the individual units. So, in my perspective, what a philosophical observer would define as pre-individual would actually be nothing but a jumble of objects' behaviors, which can be mistaken for a homogeneous spot if observed from a distance, just as it happens with a blurred cloud or a swarm. Or as Levi Bryan say, and in quote, it would be a mistake to suppose that those differences that make a difference, consist of a pre-individual or transcendental field out of which objects emerge or are constituted as mere excrescences without any potencies of their own. Where we suggest is the real would once again be divided between the true real and those condensation of the real constituting objects as epiphenomena. In short, differences are always differences belonging to objects. While we readily acknowledge that all objects have their genesis, this genesis is a genesis from other objects or discrete individuals. And in many instances, is productive of new individuals entities. Okay, the distinction between actions and objects, operations and structures, processes and substances is always established by an observer, but both sides of the distinction are contained within the existence of an autopoietic unit. When we say that an object is nothing more than its behavior, we are reducing the object to its relations to other objects, given that the object's behavior, as we have seen, is a co-construction, depending on the network of relations in which the object is entangled. Now, from this point of view, units are not good nor bad, nor strong nor weak, nor heavy nor light, and so on. These are relational properties. However, an object is not only its action, but it is also its action. In other words, an object oscillates between self-observation and ether observation, between being an observing object and being an observed object. It can take part in assemblages and compositions. It can take part in construction of other objects, but it remains autonomous, external to them. The structural coupling between units lead to the individuation of new units, which will be new units with their private state, capable of self-observation. Of course, the interaction between units can also result in their destruction. The self-observing circle gets broken. The unit do not withstand the impact with other units. Often, the individuation of a unit goes together with the destruction of several other ones. An ecological catastrophe is potentially involved in every creation. Now, as promised, I'm going to conclude with an eco-political influence. Units do not share a common word. Commonality is excluded by the autopoietic individuation, which forges singular, unique, and common units. At the same time, units can communicate with each other. Structural coupling allows them to participate in assemblages and constitute new units. Communication does not require a common word, an identity or belonging. Communication is a highly improbable event, extremely precarious, that cannot be assured, not guaranteed. At this point, it is right to ask, what about ecology in this scenario? How can we think of politics without communality? How can we think of assemblages without belonging? Everything hinges on a radical rethinking of the term catastrophe. I define ecological catastrophe as all rupture of an autopoietic circle, regardless of the magnitude, the level at which it occurs. In short, ecological catastrophes happen repeatedly and are often the other side of an individuation process. From this point of view, to borrow an expression from Jean-Luc Nancy, the French philosopher, there is an equivalence of all catastrophes. The death of an individual, the collapse of a state, the bankruptcy of a company, the destruction of a collective, the end of a love affair, these are all ecological catastrophes. Global warming announces just a specific ecological catastrophe among many others. The magnitude of the catastrophe cannot be a good criterion to implement a given policy, since the magnitude is always observer dependent. Ecological policies can avert a climate catastrophe only on the condition of causing other catastrophes considered to be of little importance, namely only on the condition of dismantling those units considered responsible for the catastrophe. The point is that there are no solutions that are not catastrophic. Every solution is the forerunner of other catastrophes. In particular, this is the case for the final solution. This is what Luhmann reproached to the green movements. The catastrophe that the movements want to avert invokes further catastrophes. That is, it invokes the decomplexification of society, the fact that the different functional systems that make up society lose their autonomy, their difference, thus that the autopoietic circle of this system is broken. There is no solution other than accepting the catastrophe. Acceptance should not result in assuming a passive posture, far from it. On the contrary, acceptance should consist in paying daily attention to all the many catastrophes that unfold before our eyes without us even noticing. Being attentive to catastrophes means constantly asking ourselves how to live ecologically in a universe that does not belong to us and to which we do not belong, or how to live a meaningless life ethically, or again, how to live politically in the absence of any communality. Thanks for your attention.
So now we have a lot of time for discussion. I mean, 1 hour.
Can you use that camera?
Yes, I will be seen kind of like from. Yeah.
I don't know.
It's
No.
too strange. So who wants to start with questions, comments?
Yeah, I guess I will be the only one. And I'm sorry I'm gonna start copying because I'm gonna brilliant presentation. I think one of the best I've ever heard in this series. I won't say I agree with everything, but the depth and the kind of approach to object ontology, linking this to cybernetics, I think it's really I have a few questions though. I'm now not going to distinguish between the authors that you base yourself upon I take this presentation as your approach to this problematic. So when I say you say this or you say that, I don't care for the moment whether it's Glanville or Nancy or you who did so, right?
Okay.
You speak about the cycle of self-reflexivity or the circle of self-reflexivity, and I agree. And in that sense, indeed, the outside is already in the inside. But what I lack is the point where there is no circle, but just a point. Because the circle, of course, implies a certain distance somehow. If you put it geometrically, you can really see that there is a circle with a small or a bigger radius, and you start and you get back. But of course, you can have this observation also in the point where there is no radius and hence no distance at all. And that's what I lack a little bit, this paradoxical 0 point within all self-reflexivity, which you can see clearly in the nice different ways of formulating the liar paradox. I lie, compare to the following sentence lies, the former sentence, the following sentence is true, the first sentence lies. The former sentence is false, the former sentence is true. You know, so you get this bouncing up and down, and you can represent that as a circular movement. But the first, no, it's a point. There is no radius, there is no time, there is no space. It's a paradox. And this I miss in this presentation. Where is this paradox? That's my first question. The second. Okay, yeah, why not?
No.
Yeah, there is a certain connection between my question.
Yes.
The second question is: do I understand this concept of units, which is radically unique and nevertheless coupled without being part of? Can I feel, but I cannot put my finger on it, a communality with Leibniz's monad.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, just
Yes,
not
absolutely.
what Leibniz's monad is not a ridiculous concept.
No.
So voilà, that's
I start from
Yes.
this.
yeah, that's my second question.
Okay.
Because then you also have the coincidence of the micro and the macro, of course. So that's another way of putting the paradox forward. And then the last thing is dualism, self-reflexivity, in the sense that you state for the observing unit or object or autopoietic object that becomes an observer. I mean, an autopoietic object becomes an observer somehow because an observer is itself. It's not a new category of things, right? So when you, in order to go from this point observation, which is there simply, which I would say is what instantiates your being itself, right? The coincidence of your being and your non-being here and now. But there should be some dualism arising somewhere, in the sense that this reflexive consciousness seems to imply an internal taking distance of yourself, which is also what's generating the possibility of making the circle from the inside to the outside and back. But I didn't see it in the presentation. Where is it?
Okay. I would like to start from the second question.
Yes.
Leibniz and monadology, because there is absolutely a similarity between Glanville's theory of objects and theory of units, and Leibniz monadology. A unit is a sort of monad. So I think that Albert Müller has proposed a comparison between monadology and Glanville's theory. So we can consider Glanville's theory of object, theory of units, as a sort of new monadology. New monadology because, yes, a unit is a monad, because it is irreducible, but at the same time, a unit is not immortal.
Yeah.
This is the first difference with monadology. The second difference with monadology is the fact that in Leibniz we have we find a pre-established harmony. In this account, we don't find a pre-established harmony, but the common is not pre-established, but the common is something that yes, can be obtained with a lot of mediation, a lot of communication that are always precarious and yes, are guess. And so there is not pre-established harmony, and there is not big monad, no, in the object in the Glanville's theory. There is not a sort of yes, God, big monad, able to integrate all the small monads. And a second difference, there is not a difference between body and the monads. Cioè assemblages, composition, no? Leibniz divides between composition and monads. Monads can take part to composition, but the composition are some that is subjected to decadence, no, on time. Monads are immortal.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, I think, there is
a kind of pluralism.
Yeah, yes, exactly. But what I find very interesting in Glanville's account is the idea that also composition, also assemblages are units.
Yeah.
No, so this is radically different with monadology, but there is a similarity on the idea of a unit as a monad. Mm-hmm. Okay. Irreducible, yes, elementary particle. Mm-hmm. And
then the paradoxes and
the paradox and the dualism. There is a sort of dualism in Glanville's, and the dualism of private side and
yes.
and public side. And this is the fact that that in self-observing itself, an object, a unit, yes, can have an experience of itself that is private, personal. For example, I cannot see it in the same way you now are seeing me. I cannot see your from your perspective. So your perspective is your private side, but you are also a public side. So you can enter in connection with a lot of other entities, agents. You can be subjected to the action of other entity, and you can operate on other units, object, and so on. So, but you cannot grasp the private side of another object. No? So there is a duality. As for me, it's a duality that is irreducible.
Does the unit seize its own insight?
No. The unit is not only its inside.
No. I did not say how does it see its own insight.
Okay.
Because it sees through going via the outside. You know, that's what I said. This you have this circle of self-reflexivity, but then you also have this point. And I think in order to see yourself in that way of the circle, you need to take some internal distance order.
Exactly. And this is the difference. There is another difference, another dualism in Glanville, and the dualism between observing object and observed object. So there is a temporality in the self-observation. Yes. You cannot grasp yourself in. So you cannot observe. Basically, you can observe only some operations of yourself, but you cannot grasp yourself in your entirety.
Okay, that's enough. I think
there is this, yes, there is this temporality in the Glanville says an object can be either in a observing position or in observed position, also in the circle of self-observation. So these two positions, in a certain sense, are.
There is something fishy there, right?
Yes.
There is something fishy there. They lack something.
And the question of the point, yes, but I think that also in this case, temporality plays an important role.
Yes,
No? Because the circle of self-reflexivity is a circle involves temporality.
Yes.
The point doesn't involve temporality.
Since the point is not there in this system, there is a strange thing that lacks. There is
Exactly.
something that lacks. But okay, your answer is very clear, but we should discuss this on another moment.
Okay.
There will be other people.
Thanks for your question.
Yeah.
I have two comments. Well, one, you probably can guess that my criticism of the whole approach of objects is that you kind of assume that there must be an object existing for anything else. Well, I believe in a process ontology. That means that objects are stabilized processes, and in that sense, the autopoietic account fits. If autopoiesis is defined as a self-maintaining network of processes, then it generates an object. But there are processes before there are objects. So that's one general comment. And then what I liked in your approach is that you look at wholes and parts as being, in a sense, independent. Like you say, I am in a relationship with Gaia. Now, if you think in terms of space, time, encompassing, I'm part of Gaia. But on the other hand, Gaia has a different kind of dynamics, a different kind of autonomy, that it's not the same as my dynamics. And therefore, I can be in good or bad relationships with Gaia. We are independent. And I mean, one of the ways this has been formulated in philosophy and in systems theory is through the notion of downward causation. There's upward causation from me to Gaia and downward causation from Gaia to me, but that's not a very nice concept. It can explain to some people, to the strict reductionist, for the strict reductionism, I am part of Gaia. That means that my processes plus these of all the other parts of Gaia determine Gaia, and Gaia does not have any independent existence. In the systems theoretical point of view, that's obviously not a good approach. So then you can say, well, Gaia has an independent existence, and therefore there's a downward causation from Gaia to me. But that's indeed kind of a cop-out. I like more what you presented, that Gaia and me are different, and it is that autonomous and that interact with each other. And I think it's just because of our intuitive bias that seeing parts and wholes as parts being inside the whole, that means the whole is bigger and the parts are inside it, we kind of tend to assume that therefore the whole has some kind of a hierarchical control or authority over its parts, which is not true. Just Belgian society as a whole does not have control over all its parts, because some parts will be doing things that are very much against the rules of Belgian society. There is indeed. And then I thought of one nice example, which is related to the monadology, of how you can express this idea that wholes and parts are not necessarily in a hierarchical relationship. In the 1960s, when they were building the theory of elementary particles, there was the idea, yes, each time we find a particle that we think that's elementary, it turns out that there is another particle inside. Will this ever stop? And then there was this revolutionary suggestion by a physicist called Geoffrey Chu, which he called a bootstrapping approach. And his idea was that at the lowest level, one particle is made up out of other particles these other particles are actually made up of the same particles. So an A consists of a B and a C together, and a B consists of an A and a C consists of an A and a B, which kind of solved the problem because there were no longer parts that had to be smaller than the others, because in a sense they were all at the same level.
Yes, yes.
And I think that's a nice way to put it. And my approach in general has been always this bootstrapping approach. Something is defined by its relationships with other things, but these other things themselves are defined by its relationship with the first thing and by everything.
This is the idea of a hierarchy developed by McCulloch. McCulloch wrote a paper about the preference, and there is a sort of strange loop. Yes, A is preferred to B. B is preferred to C, but C is preferred to A. And this is a strange loop because you cannot organize it in a hierarchy. Basically, it's very similar to the last example. Is the impossibility to it's a sort of
but it's like the issue.
Exactly. Is the Moebius strip? No, it's the
this isn't too simple, okay? Because this you can reduce by a cycle. The bootstrapping is something like A is B and C, B is A C, and C is
okay.
A B.
Yes.
Or C is part of
Yes. It's yes, no, it's exactly
but
what
you
I
mean that's what you mean there.
yes.
Because the cycle
It's a Moebius stripe.
the echelon cycle is also not possible at the same level.
Exactly.
Okay.
Is what Douglas Hofstadter calls the hierarchy strange loop.
But it's a paradox.
It's a paradox.
Yeah, but it does not need to be a paradox.
It's a paradox in this.
Why? How is it different
It's not a moral question. Not to do with acceptance. It's okay.
It doesn't need to be a paradox.
that it's a private that we don't feel it and it's a public?
So the way I sometimes depict this,
It's paradoxes of facts.
like A is then B, C, G, F, E, D, but E is an L, K, F, A. So each of them has all, it's a little bit like the monadology, except that it's not reflecting everything, it's just reflecting
But
its
it's
neighbors.
like the infinite problem. You take apart a segment of the real line, you divide it, and every part is as big, as full, as unexhaustible as the smallest part is as big as the biggest part. In the limit, the smallest becomes Nicholas Cusanus.
Yes,
It's a very old theme. It's nice to see that it comes back here in such a clearly formulated way, and I agree that it gives it in this context a new or an original, a fresh approach to the part whole problem.
Yes.
The idea itself is not new.
yes, exactly. But concerning the whole parts problem, yes, I generally really appreciate the Luhmann distinction between a system and environment that is a sort of paradox, because the system is the distinction between system and environment. So
Yes,
you
yes, yes.
you find the environment inside the system.
Yes.
The system. So it's not clear. It's not clear the relation between the system that enter in the definition of the system inside the definition. No?
And that's where the
But-
non-applied
Yes.
comes back, and that's also where the idea of the perspective comes back here.
Yes, exactly. But it's really interesting that you can obtain something like a whole part relation by means of the concept of re-entry.
Yes.
Spencer about re-entry, because difference between system and environment re-enter on the system. So this system is the difference between system and environment. But this point, you find a hierarchy when you consider that this system is basically different from this. And the paradox is find this system inside this.
Yes.
No?
Completely agree. Yes.
And this is exactly the Escher rip. About process, action, and so on. Yes, my idea is to start from the concept of difference and an operation. I intend an operation as a difference. So when I append an operation, and operations are events, basically. When happen an operation, immediately this operation creates a distinction, and the distinction that characterizes a unit. So in a certain sense, for me, there is not a process before the unit, and there is not a unit before the process, but unit and a unit object system and process happen in the same time with this event that we call operation of difference. So it's my attempt was to overcome the dichotomy processes, actions, and operation on the one hand, and objects, structures, and so on the other, on the basis of this fact, the fact that an operation, when an operation happened, this creates immediately a distinction, and so generate immediately a unit. But unit and operation are coexistent.
Can you give an example of that?
I think it's what Morin tells about the cell. The cell always, the cell has a pre-conscious existence because it knows what's different from itself, and so it's the operation.
The cell, yes, could be a good example in the sense that, for example, in embryogenesis. So this is not my opinion. In the embryogenesis, we start with the distinction between a totipotent cell and its environment, and this is the first difference. This happens.
Yes.
And there is a process of re-entry. So inside the cells generate other cells. There is a differentiation, and there is a continuous process of differentiation.
Because this environment influence.
Yes, exactly.
But the cell also somehow influences the environment.
Yes.
So,
but the bottom line of my view is that yes, we must start from a distinction, from a difference.
Yeah.
So
I call it a condition, where a condition could be an object, but a condition could be like there's light or there's a sound. Condition does not need to be an object. A condition needs something that makes a difference. A difference that makes a difference.
yes, okay. Maybe it is because we have in mind two different definition of the term object. Maybe objects. Yes, we can avoid to use the term object, and
I mean,
Jan
what's your definition of object? Because in object-oriented ontology, I still haven't quite understood.
yes, object is exactly what Jan Bogos defined unit. An object for object-oriented ontology is this unit. So For example,
Unit can mean anything. A unit can be
is
1, 2, 3 when I'm
no,
counting.
is the difference. Unit is the difference.
Yeah, so about this, I have a question or like a comment, because the closer to the conclusions you are coming about those catastrophes and about this, that this difference is always like inclusive, that the observation is always beside it and so on, like the more kind of like it was sounding to me, whereas at the beginning where you were building kind of like a stage and in your argumentation, I lost like 2 moments, and this comes back exactly to this difference between the object, because in this universe that you were already describing as objects, the objects were autopoietic and self-observing and other observing already, yes. So, but when you were speaking about Ashby, you attributed this to a system, and you gave this example of a pendulum as an object.
Yes.
So, in this other sense, the pendulum wouldn't be an object, yes. There would be like all those things you were describing as possible to distinguish within the object. Like you had those bacteria, you had this, you had this, there would be different types of observers, yes?
Yes.
So you were using a word object into different meanings.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So in the second part already, you were using the word object in the sense of a system, yeah?
In the second part.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. So why this shift? Like I lost this kind of like a reason why you are like introducing that, and you're
It's a sort of short story of cybernetics, no? Because I start with first order cybernetics. I haven't used this terminology, but HB, the concept of HB is that we have a construction of a model of something that really exists in the external world. No, there is a sort of naive realism. There is a real object, a material object. There is a model of the material object. We have the observer that is the agent that produces this model of the material object. So there is the cybernetics of observed system, of observed object, construction of system as model of object. Second step is second order, the classic paradigm in second order cybernetics. So the problem of observation, no? Because in HB we can find a brilliant definition of what a system is, but what is the object? What is the observer? We must consider the observer system on object or something else. No? So there is the idea that the observer cannot be a system because it's generate exactly this paradox. No?
Yeah.
Because I have a first observer. No, if the observer is a system, the first observer must be the result of the selection of the second observer. The second observer must be the result of the selection of the third observer, and so on. No?
So
that's not a paradox, that's an infinite regress.
Infinite regress. Yeah.
So
The paradox is the paradox is this, but yes, infinite regress, and the third line is a sort of alternative view in second order cybernetics, and Glanville is a minor author in second order cybernetics. No, is I don't know. He doesn't. He isn't part of the Hall of Fame of second order cyberneticians. No? When we talk about second order cyberneticians, generally Maturana, Varela, Heinz von Fosser, Gordon Pask, Glanville is a minor author, but it's very interesting because he put in discussion the keystone of second order cybernetics, the distinction between operation and observation. So essentially, Glanville says it's always an observer that decides if one entity is self-reflexive or if is not self-reflexive. Is a choice of an observer.
Yeah,
So
but in a sense, like to me, it's like it's almost like a linguistic game, because like what this Glanville does attributes the properties into the word object that attribute to the
exactly
to the
there is
system.
a sort of,
And then, like say, oh, this is an object, but it's like, okay, but,
Yes, but-
this one was already describing this just by a different name. Yeah?
wait, there is a difference in the reference,
Uh-huh.
but at the same time there are significant differences from a theoretical point of view, because the second line, the observing systems line, yes, is very useful, probably for a social scientist that must be divided between self-reflexive system and non-self-reflexive. For example, it's a fundamental distinction in Luhmann, no? Because in Luhmann we find a sort of tripartition, no? The autopoiesis level in biological system that are not meaning, no? Ontological biological system are not meaning oriented. The meaning is a production of a psychic system and a social system.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that they are not self-observing and not doing this system environment self-observation looping. Because if you take autopoiesis, the meaning of autopoiesis concept in Maturana and Varela, this is already there. So there's no like monovalent in your terms observation.
Yes.
Autopoiesis it's not like simple self-organization. It's always self-observation because it's a process of cognition all the way down. So it's kind of like getting lost in translation, and then it's reintroduced again by another theorist.
Yes.
I think that notion of difference is crucial here. You and the people you refer to use difference in a different way than the original second point, cybernetics.
Yes.
In the sense that it becomes as if, I don't say it is, but as if it were an ontological primitive. I don't say that because we don't take, of course, not an ontological realist in the metaphysical sense point of view. But the point is, because objects and process, if you want, unit and observation are coexistent all the time. There is no priority there. There is not first the object and then the process, not first the process and then the object. What constitutes this fact is precisely those differences. The difference actually, like already, like it is discussed by German and French philosophy. I mean, it's the difference that is like, it's not the difference in the sense that I differ from you.
Yes.
Like a composition game, like I have different parts from you. It is constitutive of the fact that there is at the same time a unit and the process of observation, of self-reflection. And that's, you can say that's the primitive of this description, but that's not wrong, not right, because then you assume, like he said, a first particle, and then you can go for other first particles and go all the way the elephants down. That's not what it intends. But that's, the system always falls back on itself, by the way. That's why it doesn't need this. It doesn't need all the elephants going down. There is no foundational problem.
Exactly. There is no foundation.
Yeah. And nevertheless, it is real, if you want.
Yeah. Okay. So basically,
so you're free to choose, huh? If you want to build a system, you can choose. I choose that processes go before objects.
exactly.
And I can choose that objects go before processes. They will be, in the end, on the level that, because they choose and they make a priority where they actually, if you want to say it like that, is no. They will end up always with some shortage at the end, and they will be equivalent in that. Whether you take the object or the process as the starting point, they will lead to different different insights on some aspects. You will have different perspective
Mm-hmm.
on both systems at the local part and the between brackets the whole. You will learn something different, but in the end, it's a photo negative of each one.
Because an object that starts a process needs a process. An object cannot make a process. The
Yeah, but
process
that's
needs to be there.
not in the
Process can make an object cannot make
yeah,
a
but
process.
that's only because you already installed the priority. Here you don't have this problem.
Even if you define the primitive as a difference, the difference must make a difference. There must be a process. Difference alone is nothing.
But
Difference. What's the
But
difference?
just being, it's making.
Being doesn't do
No, but that's
anything.
the
This
difference.
table
The difference.
is not doing
The
anything.
difference is constituted of the fact that there is a unit and an observation. But you cannot have a process without the object, just that you can have an object without the process. That's why they are both always there. That's what makes the difference.
If you define the object like he said as a difference, then I'm willing to go along with you. But if you say that the object can be the difference without a process, no.
I
The
did not.
difference doesn't do anything.
I'm saying that being is already this process.
No,
because-
being
because-
is not a process.
No, like what we call the
Yeah, well,
being
no, it
is
is,
already
yes, it
this
is.
process.
Yeah.
Like what you will call the being, it's already the process of
Yeah.
establishing
Yes,
this.
yes.
Yeah.
The being is a process, but
Autopoietic is a process, so you have an object.
Sometimes between words, like
No,
you say
no,
being and
words,
then.
no, words have real meanings. It's not just linguistic.
Yeah, but we have different meanings in those words, and then we have endless discussions because we have.
It is
different
very
meanings.
interesting that.
Well, that's why I want to have a good definition of an object, because let's say the traditional intuitive notion
Yes,
of an
yes,
object is apparently not
Clearly.
what you're speaking about.
this is a problem in object-oriented ontology. Is object-oriented ontologies use a completely uncommon definition of a common definition of object. So this is a problem of object-oriented ontology. Is the reason because there are so much resistance, no, to object-oriented ontology, because object is something radically different between what we find in the tradition, no? The object as a passive, inanimate thing that it's composed only of matter and is organized by the ilomorphic schemas, Aristotelic ilomorphic schema. No? There is from on one hand matter that is amorphic, no? And on the other hand we find a form that inform the matter. So there is this encounter, but this is clearly a distinction that we don't find in object-oriented ontology, because the concept of object is clearly it's not, if you want, it's not material. They are also very provocative. For example, Harry Potter is an object, is a real object. A fictional character is a real object for object-oriented ontology.
Do you mean Harry Potter
so
the character or Harry Potter the series?
Yes, both are two different objects: the series and the character.
No, but
And
is
so
it
there is a very
The point is you cannot, I agree with you again. Basically not metaphysically set, because then you separate, and I know people don't like this word, but being from non-being, where you get towards the static and
Yes.
dynamic that fall apart. But of course, the dynamic as an apart and without the static that's like the process without the object.
Yes.
It's as metaphysical and as single in the sense of one half of the question only. That's what I appreciate so much in this approach, because they are inextricably folded together, and they are not the same in a kind
This is
of
the idea.
in a kind of homogeneous way. There is differentiation in difference, if you want. But of course, the reason why metaphysics started is because this is an original paradoxicality in being. Yeah, but you can see that it's not, but clearly demonstrated 5 or 6 times today, and it's not. It is, yeah, and it is no problem. It is no
I want to
problem.
hear his opinion.
But
not
yes,
yours.
yeah, but
No, it's
you're
of course. Yes, because the idea is okay. An important point is yes, biunivocal and univocal operation, because is central in my discourse. There is not a process of observation without a distinction. This is the point. No? So observer is produce a distinction, or yes, produce a distinction, indicate one side of the distinction. No? For example, the distinction is system environment. The observer indicate the system. But an observer cannot see at the same time the two sides. Can only observe one side. So this means that in every process of observation, there is an externality. There is not an observer that can grasp the totality of the totality of this difference. And sorry?
let him continue.
So this means that every process of observer works by means of a blind spot. There is not an observer that are not a blind spot. Because the blind spot is exactly the impossibility to see the two sides at the same time.
Well, I would say that's an understatement. Everything is blind except the one distinction made, the one indication made. So
yes, but okay, but I don't know. There is the fact that in order to observe, I must make a distinction of this type, no? And so the problem of second order observer is the problem that I cannot see my blind spot. Only another observer can see my blind spot, but the second order observer can observe my blind spot, only create another blind spot. Only so there is not a point of view that can encompass all point of view. This is for me, yes, one of the theses we can obtain from this paradigm. So there is always point of view. Points of view among points of view. So there is not. This is very important from the systemic point of view, if you want, because the systemic point of view see the blind spot of other point of view, other perspective, but the systemic point of view cannot see its blind spots. So the blind spot can be seen only by another observer. So it's the idea that
well, you can stop the infinite recursion by just having a system that says of itself, I know that I have somewhere a blind spot, and others will have other blind spots. You don't need to each time go.
Okay, però, yes, okay.
That's just, we know that blind spots exist. We know we will never be able to get them all, like the theorem of Gödel. We know there are unprovable assertions.
Okay, but I think it's important to consider this fact when we talk about transdisciplinarity, for example. When we try to define a point of view on other disciplines, able to encompass the perspective of other disciplines. We can do this move if you want, but we must be aware about the fact that we observe from a blind spot. We have a blind spot. So it's yes, okay.
A question. I agree with this. Like this is almost like not even almost. This is kind of axiomatic in terms of understanding this paradigm of observation, and it's not this blind spot in this sense. It's not like the general things you don't see, because obviously the observation observes something, doesn't observe other things, but this blind spot is about observing this kind of like this distinction. Yes, so this
Yes.
excluded middle or whatever. Yes, so the very thing introduced by the fact that you are dividing the in and out. Yes, okay with this. And now I have a different question. If you take like it's a more like an application question. If you take a human being as a you know, like the human psychology as a like entity, do you tend to see a person, the thing that we signify with the I in language, as one observer or as a multitude of observations? Because like if you take the object pendulum, you would apply the word object to multiplicity of the different processes happening in this pendulum. Yes, and you would say like chemical processes, physical processes, like bacteria, whatever. Yes, so like I tend to see a human psychology as like a cloud of those observations that are mutually observing themselves.
Okay.
Yes. So you self-describe in language, and then you have a dream, and then you look at yourself, and then you have like so in that sense it's not like this one thing.
Has this concept of P individuals, which are different individuals, perspectives within the same.
Yeah. So this is exactly this, like the complexity of the human psychology for me is the fact that you have like you know like few hundred of those like lines kind of like quarreling with each other, yes, and also observing each other, yes.
No,
so so
yes, absolutely. It's I don't know, but it's a very intriguing question. And
why I don't like this kind of approaches of meta level, infinitely guess, like E can observe A can observe E, but E can observe L, but A cannot observe L. So they each have a limited perspective, but in a sense, all of them together have all the perspectives. But of course, you cannot ever be all of them together. Each of them has a limited perspective, but the other one has a limited perspective, which is different, etc. It just extends. I mean, each individual has a different perspective, but it does not stop you from having a theory that says there is this infinite number of different perspectives that complement each other. It's God's eye view. We will never be God. God cannot exist. But you can imagine that there are all these different perspectives. It doesn't need to be paradoxical.
But it is because it's paradoxical that it's finite. This does not have to go on forever. There is no infinite regress in that system. There is only an infinite regress when you go from the meta to the meta. It doesn't need meta. There is only one of the in this system.
Yeah, okay, but then why call it a paradox?
Yeah, but it's not because you're so afraid of the word paradox.
No, I'm not afraid. No.
It's apparently a very sensitive.
What I call bootstrapping, other people call paradox. What's the difference? That bootstrapping is a constructive principle, while paradox is a principle that says That doesn't work.
But people
No,
who
it's
call it
not that
paradox.
it doesn't work.
But-
That's not, that's the logicist interpretation. It's not because, because opposites coincide that the thing, the phenomenon that is constituted by them doesn't exist. That's not reality.
Then it's a question of terminology. So if what you call paradox, I call bootstrapping, then we agree. It's just that I think the terminology bootstrapping is more
Then every,
of saying that it is a constructive
Then every-
process than the.
I don't see it's a constructive process because nobody constructs it. It is there, like.
Yeah, it is there. What I mean, it's a constructive process. It's a self-generating process.
But the point
It's
is
a
that
process
every,
that-
then if you see in that context, every movement, every change as a bootstrapping process, because it is paradoxical, of course, then I would agree.
Okay, yes. Okay. So then we agree.
Goed, mij.
I sense that for Karen, for Luca, it's like paradox is somehow like a good thing. No? It's a kind of a solution. Like if you have a kind, it's like almost a kind of question of origins. Like if you can sort of posit a paradox at the center of things, that kind of makes sense because it shows how something can appear out of nothing by merit of creating this kind of Ouroboros, you know, this snake that bites its own tail. In the kind of fabric of reality, in the fabric of mystery, and so something can come out of nothing.
I don't posit paradox, they are there.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying, that we really have to understand how lexical works. Like what you understand by a paradox, meaning something problematic that has to be resolved, and then yeah, like yeah, okay. But let me- so like what you understand by a paradox, and then you say the bootstrap is like, okay, it's a foundational mechanism. A paradox means something problematic. How Karen uses paradox, she says, okay, foundational thing, that's just, this is how it is, you know, and you understand this word differently, and then you can have a discussion forever. But if you don't hear how she means this word, you will like have this loop forever. Yes.
No.
Thank you very much.
No, I think it's more than just. I think it's more than that, because paradox is kind of like an endpoint. Okay, it's a paradox we can't go from.
The bootstrap.
Bootstrapping says it's a beginning point. Now we can put some more and more and more and more.
Both the beginning
Bootstrapping is a solution of the paradox.
Exactly the way you
Paradox is the beginning and an end. It's not just the beginning, it's not just the end, it's both, just like there.
Well, bootstrapping is not an end.
Yeah, well, that's very. I agree with what you-
I think you're both trying to find a way to tie a knot in the end. No, it's like we're both trying to find a way to put things in the shoelace to stop it coming undone. One way to end the infinite progress is kind of tie a knot in it. They're like, okay, it's paradox, it stops. And the other one is to say there is no paradox. Everything is just a game of rock, scissors, stone, paper, stone, and therefore it can just go on and on. And there's no paradox in rock, paper,
I would
stone.
simply see when there is a paradox, it stops and it begins. It stops.
I just thought it doesn't need to stop. There is no reason to stop.
Every point is an important mechanism.
But it's interesting that we end the talk, like, oh, this is the end of the talk, but it's like, it's about the difference of the meaning of difference, which makes a difference.
Yes.
It's-
Very good, very good, very good.
Wonderful summary. Yeah.
It's time to go for it, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you so much.
Can you send the slides and please with the list of references?
Absolutely.